hunt before they destroy their futures and their children. I unfortunately had a strong spiritual experience when I was up in what's the name of the little town up there below Mariba? Aranda. And I realized of the downward spiral of all of the young people there on some of the strongest dope I've ever smelt in my life. Never having been on dope, but having smelled it and recognized it, it was powerful. Now these young people are destroying their future generations by living on dope. Literally, it's going to destroy the genetic structures which will go down through generations untold. And all of a sudden it came across me that this will not be permitted to continue for very much longer. That if we're going to preserve a DNA free of impurity, that much of this particular problem will have to be wiped off the face of the earth one way or the other. Now please consider that. If you were a God and you were seeing that the future generations were being exploited and the DNA of the world was being destroyed, would you permit the bodies of man in future generations being corrupted by all of these problems? Would you say that they would be suitable housing for the progressing spirits of man? No way. There has to be a change, folks. And let's see what we can do about turning people back to the understanding of the God self within each person and get them off of those things that will destroy their living soul. All right? Now you've got some information to go with. It's a powerful information, and you can be a powerful force if you just reach about 10 people a month. You can be a very powerful force. Get this stuff duplicated at a little expense of your own and give it out to those people that you have some influence over and encourage them to do likewise. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort to turn this around, but it can be done. And it's done one at a time, one-on-one, until you've got the power with you and that power will not stop. Okay, fluoride we've talked about at length. We don't need to go into that in any greater detail. We need to discuss iridology, and where did that iridology form go? I had one here just a minute ago. Chart. There we go. Now, would you all please take out the chart to iridology? And Doug, would you carefully, Anita, can you get the slide down there? Get the slide projector ready. And Brett?
Iridology charts out there that have been developed over the years. This is certainly one of the better ones. Certainly not the only one that you can use, but it seems to oftentimes be the standard that a lot of people will use. And if you want to start with the basics of iridology here, one of the things that you're going to notice is that you have the iris in the chart here is divided up into a system of 7 zones.
Oh, sorry.
And basically the seven zones are going to be a series, as portrayed in the chart, are going to be a series of 7 concentric rings, starting from the pupil and moving out to the edge of the iris there. One of the first things you really need to get under your belt then is this zone grid system that the chart's divided up into. Because when you start talking about things in the eye, you're going to say, well, something's at, for example, if you want to talk about the heart over in this area, you're going to say, well, that's around, 245 or so in the left eye. And now, iridology can be approached in several different ways, and the general approach to iridology and the way most of the charts are set up is a structural approach, where basically a structural approach is such that a different portion of the body is equated with a different portion of the iris. And there's certainly a lot of validity to a structural approach to iridology, but it's by no means a complete understanding of the subject. And you also want to understand iridology in a functional sense. Well, basically, to put it in a nutshell, just as an example here, you got your zone 1 right here, which will be the stomach. And then if you look here in the right eye, you see where it'll say like transverse colon up here, small intestine, cecum, ascending colon. And then over here where it'll say small intestine, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. That all will be zone 2. Now, from a structural standpoint, it'll be said that zone 1 pertains to the stomach, and that zone 2 pertains to the large and small intestines. From a functional standpoint, zone 1 is basically going to pertain to the secretion of enzymes within the digestive system. So it's going to include the stomach, but it's also going to include things like the pancreas and other organs and glands that will secrete enzymes that are involved in the process of digestion. So if you're looking at these different zones and seeing what's happening in a person's body, you're going to understand not merely what's happening with specific physical structures, but you're going to understand what's going on in a functional sense with the body. And it's important to understand that the iris is speaking to you in many different layers here, so you're going to get different levels of meaning. To study the iris functionally doesn't mean that structurally is wrong. It's just they're different complementary ways of looking at it. You can think of it overall if you want to understand functionally. Then zones 1 and zones 2 are basically going to deal with the digestive system as a whole. That's primarily what you're going to be dealing with there in a functional sense. If you want to consider it structurally, certain portions of the large intestine are going to be found in certain portions of zone 2. You can kind of see the way things are laid out here. You got your cecum down here, running roughly from about 5 or 5:15 up to a little past 7 here in the right eye. Then you move up to your ascending colon. You'll get your right half of the transverse colon here. You'll pick up the left half of the transverse colon over there on the left eye across the top, approximately 11 to 1. You move down from about 1 o'clock down to roughly in the vicinity of 5 o'clock there, and you're dealing with your descending colon. And then you come across from about 5 to roughly 7, and you're dealing with your sigmoid colon and then out the rectum. And then medially in each eye over about a 4-hour span, from about 7 to around 11 or so in the left eye, and from about 1 to 5 in the right eye, you're going to have your small intestines there. So, again, if you want to deal with something structurally, you're going to look for your ascending colon over in the right, your descending colon on the left, and so forth. You're going to look for your transverse colon up top, your sigmoid or your cecum down below. So if you're trying to figure out something specific about not just functional but structural, like where is this problem? Well, you can say it's in the colon, but where in the colon? If we move further out, you'll have a structure that you'll see in most of the irises here. Some of them it'll be obscured by the brown, which we'll get to in a second, but you'll have a structure in most eyes that's referred to as the autonomic nervous reed. The autonomic nervous reed, we usually abbreviate it to ANW, the autonomic nervous reed. And as far as where it will actually be located in the iris, this can vary tremendously. I mean, on the chart, it's basically around a third or a little bit more, roughly about a third of the way out from the edge of the pupil out to the edge of the iris as a whole. But in practice, it'll be all over the place. In practice, you'll see some people where the autonomic nerve reed is clear into the edge of the pupil. You'll see other people where it's clear out almost to the edge of the iris. You'll see sometimes in the same eye places where it goes, way out, and other places where it goes way in. So, don't expect the autonomic nerve reed to look exactly like it does in the chart, because it is going to vary pretty widely from one person to the next. Generally speaking, zones 1 and zones 2 will be inside the autonomic nerve reed, generally speaking. Sometimes when the autonomic nerve reed is extremely tight, you will actually see some of zone 1 sticking out beyond the autonomic nerve reed. But that'll make a little bit more sense when we see some of these eye slides. But, under normal circumstances, you could say zones 1 and zones 2 are inside the autonomic nerve reed. And then you're going to have your zones 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It'll be outside the autonomic nerve reed. Now, zone 3 here is going to be right here. As I'm tracing it around here, you can see if you come outside the autonomic nerve wreath, you've got a nicely drawn circle that comes out about that far. And so you've got a number of different structures there that will be at least in part contained within zone 3. Overall, what zone 3 is primarily dealing with is going to be your endocrine system, your glands. That's not the only thing. That's not the only thing that's going to be found in zone 3. I mean, as you can see from the chart, you're going to have some of your major organs are going to stick that far in. Like, for example, the spleen will be sticking pretty far in there. You'll have other structures like the bladder, for example, that will go on into zone 3. So you don't want to take that too literally when I say zone 3 is the endocrine system. But overall, that's what you're going to be looking for. You look up here at the top of the chart. You got your pituitary glands, you got your pineal gland, you got your uterus or prostate, the adrenals, the pancreas, and so forth. You've got most of your endocrine glands right there in zone 3. If you move out a ways, the next zone out you're going to hit is zone 4 here. And the next zone out beyond that is zone 5. And you'll have a number of things here in zones 4 and 5. Primarily, if you want to categorize zones 4 and 5, you're going to be dealing a lot with the muscles and the bones in the body here. You're also going to be dealing with a lot of your major organs as they're going through here, but primarily one of the main things you can look for in zones 4 and 5 is the muscles and the bones. And the next zone we hit further out here, if you look right down here where it says lymphatic and circulatory systems, and you'll see it again up here, lymphatic and circulatory systems. It'll be kind of a thinner zone here, and that of course will be zone 6, which like it says in the chart, you're dealing with the lymphatic system and the circulatory system there in zone 6. And finally, we move out to the edge of the chart. You see where it says skin right up here between 10 and 11, and again over there between 1 and 2 in the left eye. This will be zone 7, and according to Jensen's terminology, zone 7 pertains to the skin, and, excuse me? Yeah. According to Jensen's terminology, zone 7 will pertain to the skin, which is true in part, but zone 7 will also pertain to the body at a cellular level. So when you're looking at what's going on there, you want to try to understand not simply what's there directly pertaining to the skin, but also overall what's going on in the individual at the cellular level. I'm at a bit of a handicap here because I'm not sure how much you guys have done in the iridology. Was there a full weekend of iridology?
Yes.
I mean, am I boring people? Is this stuff you guys already know here? Okay, just checking. Can't see a lot of the faces with the bright light shining here either. So, at any rate, if you want to look at the overall structure of the iris, why don't we flip to the next slide just for a second, Anita?
Other way.
Please. Okay, we can get that. Is that about as good as it's going to get on the focus there? Okay, well this is a pretty good slide here to get a sense of the overall structure of the iris and some of the basic things that we're going to look at here. First thing that you're going to find in the iris here, of course, you want to find the pupil here, which hopefully most of you can find here. That's that black thing in the middle that you see out of. Now, in iridology, you are actually going to be considering the size and the shape of the pupil. This will have certain meanings. I don't know if we're going to get into that right at the beginning here, but there are certain signs that you're going to look for in the pupil as far as its things like its response to light, its symmetry, whether it's circular, elliptical, flattened in different areas, and so forth. So there are some pupil signs that you do need to consider as well. I mean, ultimately here, we're not just going to study the iris, we're going to be studying the pupil, and we're going to be studying the sclera as well, which will be the white of the eye. So we're taking the whole lot there as far as understanding what's going on here. Now, immediately surrounding the pupil, you're going to have what's called the pupillary thrill. In this particular eye here, you can see it's kind of a nice orangey, well, it's sort of a reddish-brown color there. And this will have some different names. It's usually called either the pupillary thrill or the pupillary ruff, R-U-F-F. And, we pretty much use those terms interchangeably. And a little bit down the line, we'll get into what the different colors and thicknesses and shapes of the pupillary thrill may indicate. But basically, it will range in color from like an orange to a reddish brown to a dark brown to a black. You'll see a wide range of color there. In some people, it may well be black enough that you can barely distinguish it between, from the pupil. Anatomically, what this basically is it's the margin of the iris with the pupil. It's the border of the iris with the pupil. And so it's quite thin. It's not as big as some of the zones that that we refer to. It's a much thinner. It's inside zone 1. I mean, it's the innermost margin of the iris. In this particular eye, you can see zone 1. If you look right down here, you see this kind of grayish halo that comes out about this far. Can you see that from where you are?
Yeah.
Okay, that's zone 1, all the way around the iris there. You can't really see the border in some places because of where the autonomic nerve wreath comes in. I'm just going to follow the autonomic nerve wreath around here so you get a sense of what we're looking at here. There's a couple places here where it's kind of hard to follow, but I think there it is. You all follow that? And you'll note that there's some places where, I think I got it right there. You'll notice that the autonomic nerve wreath, has a lot of irregularities, and you'll see some that are quite a bit more irregular than this one here. But you'll notice right off the bat that there's places where it's further in and places that it's further out and all that. So don't expect it to be, symmetrical like on the chart. So you'll have basically your autonomic nerve wreath here. The outermost margin of the iris is referred to as the limbus. The limbus. L-I-M-B-U-S. L-I-M-B-U-S. The outermost, the outer margin of the iris here. Like the outer edge of the iris is referred to as the limbus. The inner edge here will be referred to as the pupillary thrill. And once you get these, if you start out from the pupil, you're basically going to go the pupillary thrill, the autonomic nerve wreath, and the limbus. I mean, those are 3 main landmarks to start out with in the iris, just so you can understand what the structures are that you're looking at here. And the autonomic nerve wreath is composed of fibers that run around the iris in this direction here. I guess we can refer to it as sort of a circumferential direction. The iris fibers that are making up the autonomic nerve wreath are running around in this direction. And you'll start to see that when we start to see a lot more of the slides, you'll see that the autonomic nerve wreath itself can be in many different levels, front to back, anterior to posterior. You can get a lot of different fiber structures right within the autonomic nerve wreath itself. You can get all the closed lesions and all the rest. So the autonomic nerve wreath can become a relatively complicated structure. It's a pretty simple one, and it's pretty straightforward here in this slide, but the autonomic nerve wreath itself can get pretty complex. The next thing that you want to look at are the iris fibers themselves that will be running in this direction here. And these will basically occur in 2 different groups. You'll have a set of iris fibers that originate in here at the pupillary thrill, and they basically will run out to the autonomic nerve wreath and then double back and move back in. We'll probably get one drawn up there on the whiteboard one of these days, but basically you'll get a set of iris fibers that start at the pupillary thrill or the pupillary ruff, move out to the autonomic nerve wreath, and then kind of bend around and come back to the pupillary thrill. That's one group of iris fibers. And then you'll have a second group of iris fibers that'll start out here at the limbus, move in to the autonomic nerve wreath, and then circle back and move back on out. That's the essential structure that you're going to be looking at in the iris most of the time. You're going to be looking at the pupillary thrill, the autonomic nerve wreath, and the various fibers that run from the thrill to the autonomic nerve wreath and back, the various fibers that run from the limbus to the autonomic nerve wreath and back. And I guess you could say overlaid on top of that, you've got a wealth of other possible, iris landmarks. I mean, we start talking about things like nerve rings and radii solaris and all the rest, pigment spots and everything. These are all things that are overlaid upon the basic underlying iris structure that I've just drawn out for you. There's a number of other things to consider here in the iris, and one of them is that the iris has depth. I mean, so far we're only talking in 2 dimensions here, but one of the things that you want to consider is also what's going on with the iris fibers as far as their depth in the iris, because this is very, very significant. The iris itself, from front to back, is not a very deep structure. I would guess it's probably, I don't know, maybe in the vicinity of a 1/16 of an inch or something like that, give or take.
What about that?
Yeah, it's about in that. So when we talk about iris fibers moving, well, let's get a few basics down here, I guess. Do y'all know the different directions in the body? Do y'all know superior, inferior?
Yeah.
Anybody not know that? Okay, let's go over that because this will make our job a lot easier here this week. There's 6 basic directions in the body, and these are with respect to the body, not with respect to gravity or anything else. These are with respect to the body itself, and they're in pairs of opposites. One of these pairs of opposites is superior and inferior. Superior basically means to the top, towards the top of your head, and inferior means down towards your feet. So, for example, you could say that your head is superior to your chest, and your chest is superior to your abdomen is superior to your hips, and so on down the line. Y'all follow that? I mean, superior just means more to the top of your head. Inferior means more down, to the bottom, towards your feet. It doesn't matter if you stand on your head or travel to the other hemisphere of the earth or whatever. It's still the same because it's with reference to the body. So we've got superior and inferior. Does everybody have that? Okay. The next one we're going to look at is anterior, spelled with an A, and posterior. Does anybody know what that means? Okay, that's front and back, front and back. So when you're dealing with the iris, if I say that the iris fibers are moving up to the front, that means they're moving in which direction? Anterior. They're moving anterior. If I say the iris fibers are sinking back down into the iris, what are we saying? Okay, they're moving posterior. So that's 4 directions so far, and then the other 2 that we're going to look at will be medial and lateral. Medial. Do I need to spell any of these?
I'd like to slow down, please, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, where do I need to go back to, Kurt?
Anterior.
Okay, anterior, A-N-T-E-R-I-O-R. Anterior means to the front of the body. So you could say that your heart is anterior to your shoulder blade. Or you could say that your nose is normally going to be anterior to your to your ears or to the back of your head or whatever. Anterior is going to be towards the front of the body. Posterior will be towards the back of the body. So superior, inferior is just up and down, top and bottom. Anterior and posterior is front and back. You're sitting on your posterior now.
Can you hang on 2 seconds here? Lights for just one moment. Anita? Okay, I'm sensing a few things that I need to discuss here with you. As an instructor, here, please, thank you. As an instructor, the very first thing that you need to do is to learn how to receive. Now, it appears to me like that is happening very, very well, and I have no complaint. But on the other hand, what is not happening is you are not recreating what you are receiving. Now, one of the best ways you can do is to duplicate what Doug is saying. And as he is saying something to you, you receive it, and then you take a little time to duplicate it in your mind. And as you duplicate it in your mind, the different concepts, the different way of expression, the different word patterns, like I'm talking to you right now, if you are going to master the material, you have to look at it from a standpoint of receptivity and then recreating it, giving it back out. Now, when you can receive it and then give it back out in the same form in which you have received it, then you can teach it because you have received and you have re-given that which you have received. Okay? Now, so while you're sitting there, I know some of you sitting there, and you're listening very carefully and very intently, but there is no activity here of recreating the phraseology as you are receiving it. This is a very difficult thing because most people have never learned how to do that. They just haven't bothered to do it. And it's the simplest thing in the world for you folks. You've all had your points held, and you'd be surprised how much intellectual ability you will have now to be able to reduplicate or duplicate that which you have received. While at the same time as you do that, okay, you'll be moving from a, shall we use the word, a linear type thinking, which we are doing now by expressing these things in words, into a hologramic type thinking where you'll take the words that are expressed and turn that into pictures. And when you can receive as a picture and recreate as a picture, then you are not only receiving, you are recreating, and you have the information then in a manner that you can recreate and give to your students. Now, unfortunately, at the current stage of development, our memory will be a little bit on the weak side, and so you may have to take a little note here and there to go through and to put down notes so that when you go back over it, you will recognize that. And then use that as a trigger or a stimulus for the overall recreation of the entire hologramic pattern of thinking. Is that understandable?
Yeah.
Any questions? Okay, the ability to duplicate is very important to develop the intelligence. And so the receptivity, I feel that's going very, very well, but the duplication part is something in your mind you need to do. If you can't do it, then ask Doug to repeat himself on that so you can. Lights back.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
The outer edge of the eye is called
The limbus, L-I-M,
L-I-N.
yeah, L is in Lucy, L-I-M-B-U-S. Yep.
Limba.
Is this light, can you see, Anita? Please. Okay, can you see this in the dim light? Is that any better for you? Okay.
And a real bonus, I can see you guys too now.
I can see more than two.
Yeah, I can say. Okay, so we got superior and inferior and anterior and posterior. We got that wired? Everybody? Okay. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The other one we want to look at for the time being is medial and lateral. Medial and lateral. This will have to do with motion either towards or away from. If you imagine like a plane going down the middle of the body and splitting it into a left half and a right half. Imagine like a central plane, just cutting you clear in two there. If you're moving towards that, that's moving medially. And if you're moving away from that, that's moving laterally. So for example, if I move from my shoulder to my sternum, to my breastbone, what direction am I moving? Okay, let's say I start at my left shoulder and move over to my right shoulder. Okay, what direction am I moving? Can you all see my finger? All right. All right, I'm going to do it with the hips. You can see this. If I'm starting here at my left hip, moving across to the belly button and onto the other hip, what direction am I moving? Okay, what direction am I moving? Okay, what direction am I moving? Okay, so as soon as I pass the middle, I'm now going lateral, so I'm moving away from the plane. So that's pretty much what you gotta know on that one. So, at any rate, when we talk about iris fibers here, one of the things that we wanted to be very aware of is anterior and posterior movement of iris fibers. This will be very significant. Anterior and posterior movement of iris fibers. Bear in mind that we're not talking gigantic movements here. And the entire iris from front to back is only about roughly a 1/16 of an inch. So you're talking relatively slight movements in fiber depth which will be very, very significant in terms of what they indicate about what's going on in the body. And it's definitely going to take a lot of practice on your part to really understand what you're seeing there as far as iris fiber depth. While we're on that subject, maybe we ought to get out that. You want to go over the colors in the iris fiber depth now?
That's later.
Later on. Okay. At any rate, you're going to have to become a keen observer of iris fiber depth and iris fiber color. As the body is either degenerating or regenerating, you are going to get changes in iris fiber depth.
Let's let that go
Okay.
until we get to it. We got that downstream.
Skip that for now.
Okay, let's go through a few slides and go over one thing and one thing only, and that will be the pupillary rough. Only that. Next slide, Anita. Okay, you got the right button?
Now I do.
Okay. Now, in this case here, what you have is you have a very, very black pupillary rough. Now, that is inside of the zone 1 ring, but also is just outside of the pupil. Now, tomorrow we'll be going over a series of pictures, so you'll get an accurate picture of the cross-section of the iris, which we'll discuss in detail at that time. Now, if you take a very close look at that, that's very, very black. And from a psychological point of view, this means the person is resisting receiving. Now, in other words, if a person resists receiving, that means that they will be unable also to give out, because you cannot give something until you have been capable of receiving. This is a very important aspect. Therefore, you cannot truly be young until you first of all learn how to be yin. You follow what I'm saying here? The receptivity being yin, the creativity aspect or giving out being the yang. Therefore, you will find that people who are having trouble receiving are always resisting having somebody do something for them or give something to them, because as soon as something is given to them, then they feel they have to repay it in some way. They feel they have to do something back for the person who has done them a favor. They cannot receive. Because when something is given, now listen carefully, we are all guilty of this, everyone in this room. When something is given, who do we give thanks to? God. But who do we give thanks to?
The giver.
The giver. And who is the giver? God. The giver is God. So you have to have a two-way looking at the matter. You give the credit and thanks to God, but you recognize the medium, shall we say, through which that gift has arisen to you, in other words, has been given to you, the channel by which you receive that gift, and therefore you give thanks to the individualized God, so to speak, but it doesn't stop there. It should go to the one God, or else you block off the flow of things. Because if you focus on the outer channel and it stops there, then you truly haven't received, because you're indebted to the outer manifestation rather than the inner essence from whence it came. You follow me?
Yes.
And so what we have to do is we have to go back to the inner essence and acknowledge God as the creative force within us and within every other form of life, and have gratitude to that God and have a love to that God until to the point where we have that love so great within us that nothing can ever deter us from keeping that love in our heart. One of the first great commandments that few people have any comprehension of whatsoever is to love thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. You with me on this?
Yes.
So the two go together. They're not separated. So when you thank God, you're thanking God and your neighbor from whence a blessing has arisen. Okay? And you love yourself with that same degree of integrity. Now, people that are blocked on any part of that are going to have a black pupillary ruff, which will shut them off from God. Now, do you want functional iridology? Listen extremely carefully. What is happening when you have the pulsing in your fingers coming through after you held the point, and then the pulsing comes through? What is that pulsing? It's at 72 beats per minute, approximately, give or take a fraction or so. But at that 72 beats per minute, what you are now doing, the blockage has been removed on that particular point. You no longer have resistance in that area, and you are now able to receive that flow from the God presence to you. Are you with me?
Yes.
And so that God presence comes in, this begins to lighten up because the central nervous system is now beginning to function. Are you with me on this?
Yes.
All right, so we're looking at the functional aspects of this. And so this then begins to turn from black into a dark brown, and gradually into a brown, and gradually into kind of a reddish brown until you get to kind of an orangish, the best way I can describe it as an orangish, reddish brown, where the person is then capable of giving and receiving. Now, of course, we have our physical problems that enter in there. In the inability to remember not to drink hot drinks and cold drinks and things like that, which interfere with the, shall we say, inhibit the activity of the lining of the stomach, which is also a physical level that we're looking at. So as long as we're dealing with the central nervous system, we're numbing our bodies by mistreating the lining of our stomach. You with me on this?
Yes.
Okay, and that's going to affect us psychologically, so we cannot receive because our bodies are numb. And we will not be able to feel. There are a number of people in this room that are having trouble feeling. And oftentimes this is due to a number of things. Think of all the mercury you're swallowing from your teeth that are going down to the stomach, that are being absorbed directly into the lining of your stomach. I mean, think of all these little things that we've been eating for a long time. Now just try to think about that for a minute. Now that's the central nervous system that we're dealing with. Okay, any questions?
You just got over the pulse.
Pardon me?
You just got over the pulse, didn't you?
The what?
The pulse. Moving the pulse.
Okay, the pulsing. When you're holding a point and you feel that pulsing, if you check that with the cardiovascular system of the individual by taking their pulse that you find on the wrist, for example, you find that the pulse of the heart might be going at 60 beats per minute. But if you take the pulsing that you're feeling when you're holding a point of that energy coming through, that's coming through at 72 beats per minute. If it's not coming through at 72 beats per minute to start with, it will when you have completed the point holding on that, and the resistance is all gone on that particular point. Now here, a lot of people hold the point very lightly, so they get a pulse, but if you press harder, you have more pain, and then if you don't have 72, by continually to press until all the pain is gone, where you're pressing very firmly on point, then finally the pulsing comes through. The wording that you can lay on this to work with the New Age people will be called a universal life force. If you're dealing with the martial arts, they'll understand the concept of ki. If you're dealing with fundamentalists, you call it the Spirit of God because that is what it is. It's the Spirit of God that enlightens the mind and warms the heart. And all of these words are synonymous as far as we're concerned because it's as soon as the resistance is there and we come up through the scale of emotionality to unconditional love, we reach that point where the body begins to heal because that universal life force begins to pulse on through. And that will be the same for a chipmunk as it is for a rabbit, as it is for a dog or a cat or a horse, a cow, or a human. It's the same for every living thing. Okay, Doug?
John,
Hello.
does does that mean that when that pulse is coming through at 72 beats per minute, that the pupillary rough will have changed colour at that point?
Yes, sir. It'll start changing at that point a little bit at a time, depending upon the points. There was one gentleman that was always having conditions and expectations on every single thing that he did. And he was decreeing for this and affirming for that, and wanted to have it this way and that way, and he was continually in a state of disappointment because it wasn't happening the way he was praying for it. Do you ever feel that way? Well, what finally happened is he gave up, let go and let God type of thing, and became grateful for every single thing that happened the way it was. He quit trying to manipulate everything his way, and he began to receive the energies of the universe around him just as it was, without putting conditions or expectations on it. And within just a couple of months, the black went from black to a beautiful, beautiful orange. And he filled his heart with gratitude for every experience of life, just by lovingly and willingly enduring all things with non-resistance. You got the word? Underscore non-resistance. He wasn't trying to have it his way. He was allowing the universe to flow rather than trying to control it all the time, which will be a source of your nerve rings, source of your resistance, and source of your uncontrollable emotionality.